Welcome back to the StoryLens Podcast. I'm Cameron Bond. Happy that you're joining today. Really excited to share this conversation with you. We got to spend some time with Ken Howard today, a great friend and a talented marriage and family therapist. And in this conversation, we really lean into the differences between combat and conflict. As families and spouses engage in relationship and kind of seek unity and reconciliation, Ken really highlights and points out that there's a vast difference between those two approaches. And sometimes what we default to is combat when what we really want is conflict and reconciliation. So great conversation, really important to the work John and I do with families, and really is at the heart of why we do what we do. So excited for you to join this conversation. Thanks for being here. If you have a moment to like and subscribe, we appreciate it. So without further ado, we'll jump right in.
Welcome to the StoryLens Podcast, where your story is our focus. We explore wealth, legacy, and purpose through a process that starts with deep listening and leads to one-of-a-kind strategies. At Story One, we believe the best planning begins with you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited about today's conversation. We have a dear friend and just specialist in marriage and family counseling, Ken Howard. So let me tell you a little bit about Ken. Ken is a licensed marriage and family therapist. He is the founder of Aspen Partnership and has a very unique skill set in just engaging families really oftentimes, and I'm sure this wears on you at times, but like he is the guy when a bomb is going off in a family, he has a really unique skill set to come in and engage and help families seek reconciliation. But not just when things are bad, also when things are good, and just kind of working towards unity. So that kind of frames our conversation today as well. And so with that, we'll go ahead and jump in. Again, thanks for being here. If you have a moment to like, subscribe, that helps the podcast, and we appreciate it. So, John, I'll start with you. We're financial advisors. Oftentimes, the thought that comes into people's minds is, you're going to help me make sure that I fund the right accounts and that they're invested in the right things and that they grow and I pay less taxes if possible. And that's our role. However, when we're working with families, we recognize the conversation often transcends that and becomes much more about the family system, the relational dynamics, because what's the point of having a lot of wealth if it's just feeding into broken families and maybe potentially compounding problems. So, frame for us a little bit, when we intersect families, why would we have a guy like Ken on the podcast, and how that's important?
Yeah. Well, I just think, I think part of what we end up working with a lot of times, faith-based families, people that really want to have unity, people that really want to have their families involved. They really want to bless their employees, bless their families. But really, it's just a matter of, often in particular, when you start talking about, kind of intergenerational wealth, intergenerational planning, there's this thread that connects generations, right? Mm-hmm. And so often, if you think about a blue collar family or just a kind of your normal family, a lot of times what happens is the family disperses, right? So kids grow up, they go to high school, go to college, and then they go off and do their own thing, right? They may or may not stay connected, but really there's no the only thing connecting them is the fact that they're family, which isn't unimportant. It's not really tangible in the day-to-day. Compared to some of these families have multi-generational wealth, what happens is often there's a thing that keeps them connected, right? So there's a through line that connects generations across, whether that's grandparents all the way down through grandchildren that are all living, and they're connected to that family business. Or that family business is sold, or that family business has created a lot of wealth that's invested in, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, real estate, and all generations at one level are living off of that wealth or in some way connected to that wealth. You know, in the world I grew up in, a lot of times, and again, like this isn't necessarily multi-generational wealth, it was the family farm, right?
Yeah.
So the family farm was the thing that kept everyone connected, right? So grandpa or great-grandpa founded it, grandpa was farming it, dad was farming it, and then like, who's going to be the next generation that farms it, right? And so that piece of farmland really is the thing that connected multiple generations. So there's not a dispersion, right? And so when I say dispersion, like it is like, you know, like if you just raise your children to go out in the world and do great things, they get done with high school, done with college, and they just go out in the world and do great things, and they come home at Christmas or come home at Thanksgiving, maybe live in the same town, so you see them a lot more. But if you're connected because of the family business, or if you're connected because of the family wealth, there's just this need for real conversations. There's this need for, you know, the grandchild wants to go buy a business, wants to make an investment, wants to do something with money. Well, the source of that money might be the family business or the family wealth. So all of a sudden, everyone has an opinion. Compared to if that grandchild was out on their own and they'd saved $100,000 through work or whatever, and they decide they want to spend it, there might be some onlookers that are doing some backseat driving, but there's not a huge opinion on what they do with that. It's kind of their own money or their own. But in these multi-generational wealth situations, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? And so we talk about often in families, in businesses, there are rules and there are unwritten rules. And often the unwritten rules are more important than the written rules, right? And so really the idea of having unity, having reconciliation, quite frankly, having conflict well is really important if you're going to be connected across generations. And so really, you know, the thought of having kin here is just this thought of if you're going to have unity, it's going to take work, right? Yes. It's going to take tools. You know, often we see great wealth come out of people that are very wounded, right? Some of the wealthiest people that I've worked with grew up literally dirt poor. Yeah. Right? And because they were dirt poor, they had that grit, they had that thing, but they also knew that they didn't want to be poor anymore, right? And so it is this thing where it's like, yeah, how do we equip families, or how do you help families when they're wanting to stay connected, you know, kind of work through some of those issues, or kind of start even working into those issues. Yeah.
One of the things that you were talking about earlier is a term called latent learning. Latent learning is learning that you didn't set out to learn. Nobody set out to teach you, but boy, did you learn it. Yeah. And so that latent learning is invisible to the receiver of that family heirloom. And then I don't realize that I have a family tool now. I don't realize when I use it, and then I don't realize it when I pass it on to my daughter. And that's how those generational curses get passed down, by and large, because of the invisibility of the latent learning. So it's incredibly powerful. And that can be things like, what is the role of alcohol in a home? How do we repair? Our emotions are okay. Do we roll the towels or fold the towels? I mean, you know, so that latent learning is being passed down in a lot of small and really big, important ways, but without awareness.
Yeah. Well, and the other funny thing, just as you're talking about that, one of the thoughts that I had is just like, so I grew up in South Central Nebraska, rural ag community, and people don't talk about money, right? So grandpa, grandma, whoever, they might be 85 years old. They might be worth $10. They might be worth $10 million. Right. But you wouldn't know because they would never talk about it.
And don't ask.
Right. Well, and they wouldn't even talk about it with their kids, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting, like when you start thinking about like multi-generational planning, and if we're not going to talk about things, oof, all of a sudden that's not a speed bump. That's like that's like a locked jail cell kind of thing. So it is just interesting, like that latent learning of we don't talk about things. Yeah. Creates a problem. Yeah.
Well, and one of the we don't talk about things can be woundedness. You hurt my feelings, but I don't have an avenue to say, ow, that hurt. Yeah. And therefore that drop of toxin has no way to get metabolized. Our relationship has no way to reknit and repair and rebuild intimacy. And so what ends up happening is, because we can't talk about woundedness, we sweep it under the rug. But those rugs don't stay flat. They start mounding into volcanoes that are erupting, and they're also releasing toxicity. And so everybody in that system now becomes more and more toxic because we can't metabolize the woundedness in our relationships. And that starts to, in a kind of centrifugal way, push people out and away from those systems, those people, because it's getting more and more toxic. So one of the latent learnings in a home is, how do we repair or not?
Do we repair?
Yeah.
I mean, again, a lot of the wounded that we encounter, that I've encountered, is not necessarily wounding even between people that are living, right? So mom or dad were actually injured by their mom and dad, or by whatever that situation was. And because of that, and the fact that they weren't handed tools, there's no way to repair with prior generation because they're deceased.
Right.
And then they are passing that on to the next generation.
Yeah. So one of the tools that I'll use in session is something called a genogram, which is basically a family tree, but I can put a lot of things. How do you maintain relationship in the presence of anxiety? Where are the alcoholics? Where is the mental illness? Where is abuse? And so I can track it down generations. And what is interesting is 3 generations up, there was an alcoholic system. And in an alcoholic home, there are 3 hard rules: don't talk, don't tell, don't feel. So then those kids from that system learn, we can't open up our emotional state. That'll get me hurt. And so they learn to not talk about things. They're not drinkers, but they're dry drunks. They're using the tools of an alcoholic. They then marry, have kids, pass that on. So then 4 generations from there, somebody ends up in my office of, my wife wants to talk about emotions and I don't know how to do this. And then you start to look at, this has been a generational pass down for 4 generations that came from an alcoholic home. But nobody's aware of that.
I don't know if it's funny or not, and I need to change my analogy because nobody knows what these are in the next generations. But I talk about, like, when we're mentoring young people, I say there's kind of 2 households you probably grew up in. There's Cold War and there's nuclear war, right? Cold War is, we don't talk about it, problems, we don't really ever fight, but we don't ever really reconcile either, right?
Sweep it under the rug.
Right? Nuclear war, like, man, there's things exploding all over the place, but you actually might get to reconcile because you've actually had an argument, or you've actually had, right? So it's interesting, like this Cold War, nuclear war idea, like even the thought of like, so I think about the more of the environment that I grew up in, like there weren't a lot of arguments. It was much more of like, well, that hurt my feelings or that whatever. So then we just act like it didn't happen. And you do that. Well, if you do that for long enough, all of a sudden it's just like, well, we're not gonna be friends anymore because you hurt my feelings, or I'm not gonna work on the farm anymore because you're whatever those things are. So it's just interesting, like that thought of like, how do you begin to, a lot of what we see, and I think that, there's this name for it, and like I call it a change agent, but I think there's a different name for it. But it's this thought of like, if you're that person that is, you're now 30, 40, 50, 80, whatever it is, and you see like, man, the family system that I'm in, or the family system that I'm a part of, is not functioning well, or is dysfunctional. How do you begin to introduce some of those tools, or what are some of the tools that you would encourage people to,
Well, let me split 2 things apart from each other. You had mentioned the Cold War, nuclear war, so that would all fall under the umbrella of combat. But when you're in combat with somebody, there's a winner and a loser. There's only 2 seats on that teeter-totter. And so once you engage in combat, you start to split yourselves in intimacy. Intimacy is shredded. So I was a combat medic in the Army for 11 years. There's no kindness, no give, no grace, no quarter with an enemy combatant. When they give you a clean shot, you take it. So when that's the kind of relationships that you're building, is adversarial combative relationships, whether Cold War, smile and stick a shiv right in between your ribs, or nuclear war that's shrapneling everybody, it's all combat. Why would we expect intimacy with somebody that's trying to actively hurt me? So combat is going to shred relationships. Conflict, the end goal is intimacy. Not winning, but at the end of this conversation, when I open up to you and say, hey, that really hurt my feelings, the way that I offer my pain, not loaded into a gun, the way that you drop the knife and come towards the wound that you create and put salve on it, the way that you care for my wound, the way that I offer my wound, using those nuanced tools now begins to reknit intimacy and build trust. Mm-hmm. So the focus of conflict is whatever toxin is now between us that has happened, we're engaging it in a way that allows us to metabolize the toxin and reknit intimacy and trust. Mm-hmm. That is very different than combat.
Yeah, yeah. And so how do you start that? How do you start, again, like if you're in a family system where we don't have conflict, we don't talk about our feelings, right? So like there's so often in businesses, it is founders mentality is like, I'm going to stick around forever because I'm the only person that can run this place, right?
Right.
Meanwhile, you have the children or next generation that are waiting in the wings, and they're like, not getting any younger, right? But
I could step in. I could help.
But there is also this thing where it's like, often we see these, there are these situations where the families are kind of dancing around each other. When you think, man, it would be awesome if this was actually a healthy environment.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not, like a lot of families we get involved in, it's not necessarily unhealthy, but it's also, it could be better.
Right.
So like, what are some of the things you can start doing if if you wake up one day and you're like, man, I wish I had a better relationship with my dad, or a better relationship with my kid or my wife, or like, what are some ways that you can actually?
So like you, I also work with wealthy, high, people at the top of their game, whether they're on the television or on a sports team or whatever. I mean, I work with a lot of people who are incredibly good at what they're doing in that domain. Mm-hmm. And what that can steal from them is the humility that says, I'm not doing this well relationally.
Yeah.
Mm. And so where they are the top of that apex, right? Mm-hmm. But then they come home and they shred the relationships that really matter to them. And so one of the things that will work against them is the humility to recognize whatever I'm doing with my wife or my children, it's not working. Mm-hmm. And I need to learn something else. But that requires the humility to call foul on yourself and say, hey, I'm not sure I'm doing this well, or I think I keep hurting you. Mm. That can be very difficult for people that are high producers, high net worth, high whatever, because I'm the man. Well, in the immortal words of Dr. Phil, how's that working for you?
Yeah.
And so when you can look at a relationship and recognize it for what it is of, this is not what I'm wanting, to your point. I wish that I was able to talk openly with my son. Mm-hmm. And if you realize we don't have that kind of relationship, as long as both of you are still breathing, it's not too late. Right? Whatever you have built, if you had the power to build something crappy, don't you have the power to build something healthy? But you got to recognize whatever tools that we use to build this crappy thing, it's not going to get us a different result. Right. We have to acknowledge that, set that tool down, and then to do the work of acquiring something new, which is doable. God has given us neuroplasticity, our brain's capacity to create new neuronal connections over the life of the user. So you can teach an old dog new tricks if the dog wants to learn.
Yeah.
But there's humility in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that I think, like National Student Leadership Forum, National Prayer Breakfast, when I was in college, just this thought of reconciliation, right? Like my basic assumption is that, like, from an EQ, emotional intelligence standpoint, most of us aren't very good, right? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, I don't know, most of us are operating like at a 2, right? 10
because
being the best.
Because it wasn't modeled for us. Yeah.
So emotional intelligence, we may all be lacking. It's easier to point out where other people are lacking, by the way. But then it is this thought of like, reconciliation is a learned skill, right?
Yeah.
But it's also, I think, it's not practiced at all in American culture, or very narrowly in American culture. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about like true reconciliation? Like what does that look like? How do you begin to incorporate that into relationships? In particular, if you're trying to reconcile with somebody that has no clue, they don't have any of the tools on their side, right? So I think there's two. One is like reconciliation, what is it? Yeah. And then two, like, again, how do you begin to implement it when you may or may not get the person there, you may not get reciprocity, which happens often.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's split two things apart from each other: forgiveness and reconciliation. Mm-hmm. So forgiveness is the naming of a debt and the canceling of a debt. Mm-hmm. Hey, you hurt my feelings. Will you forgive me? Yes, I forgive you. So that debt is now canceled. We are debt free and connected. But it's not in forgiveness that you build trust. It's in reconciliation, which is the process of behavior change over time. So I hurt you, you say, ow. Think about a relational stove where there's one front burner and 1,000 back burners. So if you say, ow, that hurt my feelings, you have now front burnered your impact pot. I've got one of two choices. I'm either going to back burner my stuff and say, oh my gosh, what happened? And I'm going to stir that pot with you so that I have clarity of how I harmed you, so that I can now seek forgiveness. Will you forgive me for those careless words? Giving you a chance to reach back and say, yes, I forgive you. Now we're debt free. That now allows us to scaffold to reconciliation. Teach me how to love you and I will learn. Which I think is the central thematic of the cross, is that people are worth dying for. Submit one to another out of reverence for Christ. Once I can identify something that I'm doing that hurts you, I will die to self to learn a better way so that you feel loved. But it's in that process now, as I pick up that new tool that you say would feel loving, and I use it and I check in. Hey, is this feeling good? Yes, I want more of that. And it's that incremental use of that new tool over time and context that now reknits trust and builds intimacy. So you really have to see those as two separate things.
Yep.
Now, to your point, you've got to make sure that you're learning how to do that well. It makes it so much more harder if the other person isn't willing to play ball and reciprocate.
Or has never had it. I mean, like so often in dysfunctional families and dysfunctional systems, like you're introducing this new thing and it's like, never seen that before, right? So
right. Well, and maybe that's the place, is before I take this new tool and try to use it with you who've never seen it, don't understand, I'm speaking Greek, is actually not to begin in the granular, but to begin in the meta of, hey, I've learned something new about how to heal relationships. Do you want that to be a part of our relationship? For you to then open up to, well, sure, what is that? Now we can talk about it. Then we can put it into practice. But if I just change the music and change the dance on you, you're not going to have a clue what I'm doing or what you're supposed to do. So it really does need to begin in the meta. Let's talk about how we talk about what we talk about when we talk about it. So we got to start here of, is this what you want? Do you want that kind of relationship with me? If so, now we can talk about, oh, I learned this from my therapist or this podcast or whatever, and I've got this new tool. Now it's in front of both of us. What if we use this? Let me go first. Is there anything that I've done to hurt you? Let me front burner you. So, and modeling that, it at least increases the probability of the other person saying, oh, I feel so loved by that, but I think I've hurt you. And then the reciprocity. And now we can keep using it until it becomes a part of our relationship, which takes time. My people did not have those tools to model. I did not come from healthy humaning stock. So I had to learn in a master's program at 37 how unhealthy I was by looking at and opening to the world of healthy tools, healthy thinking, healthy emotions, right? And so I'm bilingual. My primary language is dysfunction, but I'm learning to speak health. I'm getting better. You know, I've been doing this for 20 years, but it's not my mother tongue. But because I did that work, my children are native speakers. Not that they are perfect, but this is the language they understand, the tools they understand, because my wife and I have done the work to backfill the deficit that our family left us in, to get to Human 101, and then to build a surplus that our children were born into. And that we're not special. We just showed up and did the work, and anybody can. That's the good news. You can make it better.
I think families kind of, we go back to this latent learning idea, and then kind of John's intro with this kind of the gravity of wealth, right? It kind of draws people together towards
or holds
it,
them together.
Holds them together. You know, a lot of times life is operating normal, and then all of a sudden there's an inciting incident. There is some point of conflict that really, maybe it is the nuclear war thing, maybe whatever, but like, at that point when relationships are fractured, when these tools don't yet exist, like, how do families then in that space find reconciliation, which, you know, as I listen to you describe it, it's a beautiful thing, but it also has a little bit of this Zen vibe of like, yes, when I'm perfectly peaceful and controlled in all my emotions, I may act, you know, so like, so if you're in that situation, or you're just recognizing we're trending in a direction where there's less unity and more fractured relationships, like, what are the entry points? How do you speak to those people, encourage them? What steps do they take?
So let me split two things apart from each other. One is what I'm constantly teaching my clients is how to widen their window of tolerance to be able to regulate themselves in the presence of something distressing or anxiety provoking. Mm-hmm. So it's learning how to self-soothe and pump the brake and stay present, stay open, stay available. So that's one thing. However, to your point, if things start to rise to the point where I'm now starting to lose traction and I want to throat punch you, right? Then does the relationship have a mechanism to take a break? Do we have a way to unclench that isn't punitive? It's not combat. It's not I'm withholding from you because I know I want you to suffer. It's I am no longer fit for human consumption. I cannot protect you from me. And so taking a break then, and the language that my wife and I use is simply, sweetheart, I need a break. And what that says when I use those words, and I don't use them in any other domain except when my limbic system, my survival brain is shutting down my prefrontal cortex, rational thought, empathy, impulse control. So the part of my brain that cares about my wife is going offline.
Yep.
And because I'm connected to myself and I can feel myself starting to lose traction, I can signal that to her to go offline, do the work of integration, then come back when I have de-escalated, integrated, to come back and say, hey, are you in a place to talk? Hey, what I said I think hurt your feelings. Can we start there? So the point of egress is when I can no longer see her as worth protecting, and the point of reentry is when I can see her as worth protecting. Our battle is not against flesh and blood. So if I see my wife as an enemy combatant and I stay, then the gloves come off and now I'm a domestic terrorist, right? So on the day that I married my wife, I promised, in the same way that I promised the United States to protect her from all enemies, foreign and domestic, I made the same commitment to my wife. I'll protect you from everything out there and me when I'm out of whack. So the best way to do that is when I feel myself starting to lose traction before 2 hours of mortal combat happen, that I have a route to get out of there and reintegrate and come back on a different plane and say, hey, I think I hurt you. Or, hey, you hurt my feelings. But now we're not enemy combatants. We're intimate allies doing conflict where the end goal is intimacy, not combat where I want to win and you lose. But if we're now one in marriage and I stab you in the leg, how do I escape that wound? Because we're one. There's no way to stab my wife in the leg where I won't suffer. There's also no way to bless her socks off where I don't reap the benefits of that blessing. So it would behoove me to be regulated. And if I start to disintegrate within my own brain, we disintegrate in our relationship. So as soon as I start to feel that tearing inside, that's when I got to get out of there to do the work of but that's me being responsible to the relationship.
Yeah. And it is interesting, like even if you think about it from a scriptural theological standpoint, like even combat is a scarcity mentality.
Yeah.
The only way I win is if somebody else will lose.
Right.
Loses,
Zero-sum
right?
mentality.
Yeah. Which is not the Lord. Like that's not the kingdom's. That's not the Lord's economy. That's not how the kingdom works. That's actually not reality.
Right.
But it is like when you get lost in that moment, you're like, I need to win, so that person needs to lose. And it's like, that's not abundant. It's not living into abundance. It's not believing that the cross is real. Like all the things that were promised.
Yeah.
Well,
and
it's
Jesus said,
that.
my sheep know my voice.
Yeah.
So I'm now listening to a voice that says, you have free license to harm your wife. Well, that's not daddy's voice. But if I don't know that.
Well, your wife or your business partner or you name it.
Fill in the blank. Yeah. The person that's in front of me, I have license to harm.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'm listening to the wrong voice because daddy's voice will never encourage me to harm one of his children.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So, John, kind of coming back to this idea, we talk about above the line, below the line a lot, so in our world, we think about above the line being this purpose, values, goals, and a little bit more of the heart of a family. And then when we go below the line, we're implementing strategies, tactics, tools, and we feel like the strategies, tactics, tools are useless if they don't align well with purpose. And sometimes I think when we intersect families, they're like, hey, let's jump into these tactics. Let's get this trust in place. Let's make this gift, whatever it might be. But we recognize the purpose is unclear, or it's vague, or maybe only one person in the family cares it. And then it's also very common when we're just sitting around the table that, it's often preceded with, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but we then lean into the real dynamics of the relationship between the father and the son. And the son is,
the emotional underpinnings of what's going on.
That's right. And so doing that work above the line, and we feel like it is so much, it's part of story, right? It is part of the heart of the family and their story, but it's also just, I think inviting people like you and Ken you into these situations where we recognize that there is disharmony or lack of unity. And so kind of encouraging, really, it is conflict, right, at times. And
which is healthy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so maybe talk about that for a minute, how conflict is healthy, because we often, and a lot of us in the Midwest came from more Cold War families. And so, it was like, I don't do conflict. I avoid conflict.
Right.
And in fact, that creates distance rather than unity. So
well, again, this is more like the upside down kingdom as well, right? Like we believe if we don't do conflict, we'll be closer.
Right.
Which is the opposite. Right.
Yeah.
Often those we do conflict with, we actually become the most intimate with.
100%.
So it is like, so just talk about that a little bit, like kind of again, like this upside down kingdom of like, we feel like if we never have an issue, we're better off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's just begin at Genesis 1:27.
Yeah.
We created you, man and woman, in our image. Do you hear the plural pronoun God is using?
Yeah.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
At the intersection of that triad is relationships. So God's a relational God. So no wonder we have the neurology of a social species that longs for deep emotional and physical connection. It's literally our birthright from God himself. So the word shalom, we tend to use as, I hope you have a chill day, right? Peace, right? But for a Hebrew, shalom means living in the flow of how God created you to live. So if God created us as relational beings, as a reflection of a relational God, then anything that gets in the way of that relationship breaks shalom with God. So if we were made for that deep connection in the body of Christ, right, as a reflection of who God is, then to be thinking about, is there anything in our relationship that is getting in the way of that intimacy? And so when that happens, how do you now repair that? So Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Not the peace fakers, where we sweep that toxicity under the rug and pretend that it's not there. Not the peace lovers. I hope peace spontaneously erupts, but I'm not going to do anything about it. There's action and sacrifice and discipline and effort and risk in that word maker, which means I have to show up and say, hey, you hurt my feelings. And for us to do the work of forgiveness and reconciliation to make peace. Joshua warred against the Midianites for 2 years, and at the end of that, many lives were lost in his part. But it says, and then there was peace in the land. Joshua was a peacemaker. He showed up. And if you split those two apart, reconciliation and, combat and conflict, when most people say, I don't like to do conflict, what they really mean is combat. I don't like to do the stuff that damages the relationship. But we don't, as followers of Jesus, have an option except to become masters of conflict, of the willingness to open in vulnerability and the willingness to attend to someone's woundedness in order to reknit intimacy and build trust. That's not an option. If Jesus said, if you're bringing a gift to my altar and you know that somebody else has something against you, leave the gift. Go reconcile with that person, then come back and give me the gift. Yep. We tend to think he's talking about a tithe check, which would have been nonsense to a first century writer of the gospel. He was saying something so inestimably bigger. Anything I've given you, any time, any talent, any treasure, don't spend anything on my kingdom until you've reconciled. Then come back and spend lavishly, right? So privileging reconciliation and forgiveness at the highest level of importance, because he understands if those emotional bricks don't get metabolized and they go into your emotional backpack, those packs will crush you and kill the relationships in my body. My burden is easy. My yoke is light, he said. Follow me and be free. I never wanted you to carry that relational debt. And when we do that, not only is there a wound between you and I, now with a proper process, but then we end intimately connected and more trust being built. that's a net gain to our relationship. Why would we avoid that? That's crazy.
Yep.
Yeah.
So what people are avoiding is the damage that comes from combat, because that's what was modeled and that's all they think there is. But there's this whole lane over here that Jesus calls us into to mindfully work through forgiveness and reconciliation, to be unburdened by those debts and reknit intimately and build relationship. That's what advances the kingdom.
Yep. Well, and it is like from a standpoint of the intimacy that comes from it, the unity that can happen in a family. I mean, all those things, it's a lot of work, but it's also a beautiful thing. So
Work with benefits.
That's right.
Yeah.
So-
Well, you have a gym in your basement. Why do you go and do squats?
Yeah.
Why do you? That's a lot of weight. That's heavy. Why do you do that?
Yeah. So I don't get fat and I can keep moving.
So you do the work to get the benefits.
Yeah.
I remember how hard you studied for, what was that,
CFP.
CFP.
Yeah.
Why did you do that?
Yeah.
That was ridiculously
Game
hard.
mastery, yeah.
Yeah.
Because of the life that you now have. You did
Yeah.
this very hard thing that produced benefits.
Yep.
That's why we do the work of forgiveness and reconciliation. It's hard that produces benefits. If we avoid the hard, the benefits go away.
Yeah.
If you stop going down to work out,
Yeah.
your gym downstairs doesn't help you.
That's right. Those weights aren't going to lift themselves.
That's right. That's right. So
Yeah.
yes, I concede.
Yeah.
It is hard work,
Yeah.
but it's hard with benefits. And if we want the benefits, then we got to show up and do the work.
Yep.
But the work was been very clearly laid out for us. The twin pillars of our faith, forgiveness and reconciliation. If we do them, we all benefit. If we don't, we suffer.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then when you think about, again, like this thought of intergenerational wealth or intergenerational planning, this thought of doing it unified, doing it in a system that reconciliation is a part of the lingo, is a part of the culture, is like all of a sudden it is this thing where it's like all of a sudden like that's a family that people do want to be a part of.
Yeah.
Right? That does make family meetings or whatever those things are, family vacations, it makes it something
much
you're
better.
looking forward to.
Absolutely.
Versus something you're dreading or wanting to avoid. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, I work every day with family systems that don't have those mechanisms, and I hear them going to their fancy pants vacations,
Yeah.
and they hate each other.
Yeah.
They hate the time. They
Yeah.
can't wait to get to Cabo to get away from their kids and go drink at the bar and
Yeah.
be like, I want to get away from my own family.
Yeah.
But that's a function of the toxicity that's been accruing. And families that know how to metabolize that, they have very different experiences together.
Yeah.
They want to be together. They crave it because it feels so safe.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, really good conversation, Ken. Thank you so much for joining us in it and just recognizing how much of a cornerstone this idea of combat and conflict and seeking reconciliation is to all families, right? Regardless of where you are, in the world. And so, really useful time. And if what you've heard Ken say is interesting to you, if you want to seek out his, if you want to connect with him, Aspen Partners is the name of his group. We'll put some information in the links below, and you can check those out. And we'd certainly encourage it. He's been a great resource to us and many of our clients, and just grateful for you.
Glad to
joining
be
us
here
today.
I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Cameron.
Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on the StoryLens Podcast. If you're navigating complex financial decisions, we're here to help. We know your story is anything but ordinary, and that's why we start there, because the right solutions are as unique as you are.
Story One Family Office, LLC, or Story One is a registered investment advisor, RIA, registered with the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Registration as an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training, and the content of this communication has not been approved or verified by the United States Securities and Exchange Commission or by any state securities authority. Story One renders individualized investment advice to persons in a particular state only after complying with the state's regulatory requirements or pursuant to an applicable state exemption or exclusion. All investments carry risk, and no investment strategy can guarantee a profit or protect from loss of capital. Past performance is not indicative of future results. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor shall this be construed as advice for the financial needs of any individual. Story One is not permitted to offer, and no statements made during this podcast should constitute legal or tax advice. The information contained herein has been compiled by independent third parties, have been obtained from sources who are believed to be reliable. However, accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by Story One.